My Father's War, written by Blake Robinson. With substantial assistance from Chihiro Tachibana, Himawari Robinson, Varian Robinson, Nobukazu Igarashi, Christopher Wright, Tsubaki Endo, the World War III Museum in Hiroshima, the World War III Veterans Association, the College of Humanity at Yutaka Yamamoto University, and the United Nations Global Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Copyright 2084. This book is dedicated in loving memory to our friends who didn't live long enough to see a free Earth. Cody Newman, Aaron Bowie, Mateo Hernandez, Asuna Tachibana, Pete Guerra, Andy Guerra, Chelsea Daniels, Kate Newbury, Chihiro Iwasaki, James Cass, Kotori Sato, Aaron Ray. And to our sisters, stolen from us by the enemy and now avenged, Jacqueline Marinette Robinson and Princess Akeno of Chiako. Chapter 1. Once More with Feeling. The voicemail was from Christopher Wright, the historian and author of the bestseller Gambling the Future, explaining Akira's secret victory. I have a great working relationship with him, just like most other history writers, and he's also collaborated with my daughter on her own investigations. Wright left a message saying that I should seek out and meet with an old man named Igarashi. Apparently, this individual recently got in contact with Wright, eager to share some interesting historical artifacts with him. Wright took one look at what this old man was offering and immediately called me. This was in early June of 2082, and I was hearing a lot of stories by then. I had just published The Stormbreakers. The book was about the men and women who fought alongside Jericho during the War in Heaven. I was one of them. Since then, I can't take 2 steps outside of my house in Honolulu without someone catching me and suggesting a topic for my next book. Millions of other stories from that day are in danger of being forgotten. Wright piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't turn down a family friend. He'd helped out my daughter Himawari on her own archaeological digs so many times that she's taken to calling him the History Dude. It didn't take much prompting on Chris's part to motivate me. I was on the Hyperline with Igarashi before a couple of days went by. Turns out it wasn't just any old man. It was the long-retired Nobukazu Igarashi, who was once a powerful member of the United Nations government. He served under Secretary General Harper and resigned after Etienne's rise to power. Igarashi told me that he wanted to share a large stack of recently declassified papers that was released by the UN government. Naturally, I was on the first flight to Toyota City after that. The papers, as it turned out, was an absolutely massive trove of documents, audio and video recordings, data drives, computers, handwritten notes, books, binders, and folders, all filled to the bursting point with information that was, until just recently, very highly classified. Nearly every item in the cache was related to an official government investigation into the activities of one of my greatest enemies, someone I haven't seen since the War in Heaven over 40 years ago. Akira Robinson. The Paradox. In life, she was a powerful psionic who traveled through time, rewriting and tampering with our history in an effort to create her sick and twisted version of a perfect future. One in which humanity used psionics to stand dominant in a galaxy where all other races were diminished. Fortunately, this scenario did not come to pass, and Akira's dark dreams for an evil empire of man died with her during the War in Heaven. In death, the paradox has proven to be one of the greatest mysteries in history. Her movements throughout both the cosmos and the timeline are difficult to track and analyze. But some people are trying to do just that. My daughter's friend, Chris Wright, has devoted his entire adult life to studying Akira and attempting to make some sense of her actions. He has written and published over 24 books about her, including the critically acclaimed Battle of Aoraki, which tells the story of Mami Tamihana's now legendary battle with the Paradox. It competed heavily with my own book, Faith in Chaos, for the top slot of the Proxima Centauri Times bestseller list for 2 months, helping to spread the truth about this crucial moment in history even further throughout the galaxy. When I saw this massive cache of documents and data, it was clear at a glance that a full investigation was warranted. I contacted some friends and family for help, and help came quickly. My wife, Chihiro Tachibana, our daughter, Himawari, and Himawari's oldest child, Varian, all showed up to help us read through these crucial documents. At Himawari's request, Christopher Wright arrived about a day later and joined the investigation as well. We read every document multiple times, wrote enough notes to fill a textbook, and finally built a timeline of events from what we discovered. Varian and Chihiro nearly burned their eyes out watching the video collection and sifting through computer data. Himawari and Chris organized the physical documents in a way that made sense. Eventually, after nearly a month of investigating, cataloging, discussing, and debating, we had a much clearer idea of just how active Akira Robinson was during the early years of my own life. Our collective worldview was shattered. Varian was floored. Chris needed several beers to calm his nerves, and my wife was feeling justifiably paranoid. All of us, including Chris and Igarashi, sat down for a meeting to talk about where we were going to go with this newfound knowledge of ours. Finally, I made the decision to make this information known, and to do so in a way that would attract the most eyes. By this point, I was already well known throughout the United Nations. Not only was I an ex-Stormbreaker and an author with several books to my name, but I was, at the time, still embroiled in the aftermath of an unsuccessful candidacy for Secretary General of the United Nations. Even though I lost to the incumbent Pascal Etienne, I was a very popular candidate and made it to the final round of the election. My name is out there, and we knew full well that people would listen to anything I have to say. That's why I've written this book, my second autobiography, to send this story as far and wide as possible. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a single famous person in the history of the galaxy who wrote a book specifically to contradict or overwrite a previously published autobiography. Yet here we are. Good reader, if you have ever purchased a copy of my autobiography, The Siege of Hiroshima, The Men and Women Who Made the World, you need to get your money back. If you have a copy in your home, throw it out, or better yet, destroy it. It's time to put the puzzle together, now that I've found all the pieces. This is the correct version of my own life story, the tale of how I became a founding member of the Stormbreakers, told once more from my own perspective, but also adding in and accounting for all of the details that Akira Robinson attempted to conceal or destroy. This is the version of the story the Paradox would prefer never saw the light of day. I was born and raised in Michigan's greatest city, but my story doesn't start until I was about 11 and a half years old. My sister and I were thick as thieves. We had to be because we were the only African-American children at our school. We felt like outsiders, even in our own neighborhood. Our family was a controversial one. Back in the early 2000s, when humans were the only intelligent species on the planet, we argued and bickered over things that seemed trivial here in 2084. My father, Joshua Dennis, was a white Irishman. My mother, Angeline, was a black Frenchwoman. In modern times, absolutely no one would have a problem with this sort of pairing. But if you lived in Detroit in the earliest part of the century, you were in for a rough ride. Plenty of people in Detroit had something to say about my parents, and it usually depended on how old they were. Nearly all of the kids in my school were white, so they would sometimes squirm at the sight of my mom and dad, then say something like, "How does that even work?" Or, "So, you're black, right? How come you don't talk like a black person?" Or, "Your sister doesn't look black. She looks like an Arab." Adults, meanwhile, were a little more subtle with their prejudice. They said things like, "You must have overcome a few challenges, family like that." And, "So, which culture are you with now?" And, "You're adopted, right?" Before I was 12 years old, I lost track of how often a stranger said things like that. I guess that makes it hard to believe me when I said I had friends back then. No, pre-hyperspace humanity wasn't as bad as the TV shows and movies make it out to be. Modern filmmakers like Frankie Ranginui depict Earth before 2015 as though it was some kind of lawless anarchy, or worse, and that everybody was distrustful and nasty towards one another until Jericho united us during the Second Hyperspace War. That's not true. Sure, Jackie and I were outliers in our youth, but we were not the constantly bullied, miserable, desperate-to-be-saved street urchins certain TV networks claim us to be. I won't use names. You know who you are. Jackie ran with a crowd of girlfriends after school each day. Their shared passion was cute animals, and they nearly always spent their free time volunteering at the animal shelter in Grosse Pointe. My circle of friends was much smaller. In fact, I only had 2 friends, but the 3 of us always enjoyed hanging out together. Cody, Aaron, and I were all fans of science fiction. We usually gathered at lunch to talk about the newest episode of Star Trek, a TV show about fictional human space explorers. We only talked about the most important parts of the show: which alien spaceship Cody wanted to fly, which alien planet I wanted to explore, and which of the handsome spacemen Aaron had a crush on this week. Sometimes I miss being 9 years old. I liked my life, and I was generally happy. But that was the year my life irreversibly changed. In 2003, just a few weeks after my 10th birthday, my dad came home from a meeting with some up-and-coming politicians. At the time, J.D. Robinson was a professor of social science at some big university downtown. He told us that the iron was hot and it was time to strike. "If I don't do this now," he said, "I'll never have the chance again." That's how I found out my dad was running for President of the United States. Jackie and I, our lives changed overnight. Suddenly, we were the most popular kids in school. Every adult wanted to ask questions about my dad or pass on some message of support to him. Kids made up excuses to sit near us or join us on group projects. Then the school counselor pulled us into his office and reminded us that we needed to set the best example at all times. "You're the face of Barton Elementary School now," he said. "This is your chance to prove to the world that character counts." All I remember is that we were just kids. Every day, news reporters and paparazzi would camp outside of school grounds and try to catch me and my little sister as we walked home. Other kids got in the way. A lot. Some punks wanted to do skateboard tricks on national television, and there were a few girls who thought that now was the best time to launch their acting careers. One girl was so desperate to get on TV, she threw herself at me. Literally. And don't you think for a moment that Jackie and I were happy about suddenly becoming the center of attention. Far from it. If anything, our situation actually got worse. People were only interested in us because our dad was famous, and we knew it. I remember Jackie shoving away some wannabe fangirls and calling them shallow. She alienated a bunch of her own friends when she realized they were trying to use her to get close to a camera. In the middle of all this, my dad was running his campaign. Looking back on it now, I have to admit he was right. The American president back then was an old man named George White, and he was very unpopular. In 2001, the U.S. was hit by the worst terrorist attack in history. Thousands died. In response, President White led our country into war against the organization responsible. Unfortunately, there was a hitch. The terrorists who attacked our country came from a place called Afghanistan. It's a medium-sized nation in Central Asia, and at the time, they were having their own civil war. One of the two sides in that fight was under the protection of the Soviet Union, a really big and powerful country that America didn't get along with. For about 2 years, American and Soviet soldiers operated in Afghanistan, each fighting their chosen enemy. But the situation got politically complicated, and then things spiraled so badly out of control that US and Soviet forces started shooting at each other instead. Things came to a head at the Battle of Kandahar, where the Soviets beat the Americans so badly that all US forces retreated from Afghanistan before the year was over. America was humiliated in front of the entire world. President White was humiliated in front of the American people. My dad was one of 2 people looking to take down the president during the next election. The Democratic Party nominated a senator from West Virginia named Herbert Dunn. Unfortunately, Dunn was proving to be out of touch with the issues. With a pair of weak candidates in the running, my dad saw his opportunity and seized it. Back then, I just assumed he didn't care about how his campaign was wrecking my life and Jackie's. He was so busy traveling the country to meet voters that I honestly thought he'd simply forgotten about us. He certainly didn't notice when I snuck out of the house one night with Cody and Aaron. We spent a whole night vandalizing Vote for Robinson signs all over Detroit. He forgot to ask if Jackie and I wanted to leave our old lives behind and move to some big mansion really far away from our friends. We did not. At least he remembered to pick us up from school on that final day. November 5th, 2004. Cobo Hall, Detroit, Michigan, United States of America. Almost there, kids. Are you excited or what? Dad was busy trying to navigate his car through the crowded streets, so he couldn't see Jackie and I in the back seat, silently crumbling up our Vote for Robinson stickers and throwing them out the window. When can we go home? Jackie whined. I want to read the new Harry Potter book tonight. You've got a TV in your office, I grumbled. Why couldn't you watch the election in there and leave us alone? Kids, you won't be talking like that tonight, Mom snapped from the front seat. I invited ABC and CNN to the lounge with us. You need to be on your best behavior. But it'd be so much easier to behave if we were back home, I shouted and kicked the back of Mom's seat. None of that, Blake. Dad didn't raise his voice. You're 11 years old now. Time to start learning how to be a man. I fell into angry silence and just watched through the windscreen as Cobo Hall came into view. The event center was packed. It seemed like all of Detroit was here for a massive election night party. All around the building were people waving signs that said stuff like, Robinson for America, and the people aren't speaking, they're shouting, and White out President White. Inside, it was even more chaotic. I was much shorter back then, so I could only see an unending forest of chattering people that Mom pulled me through by the hand. We kept a very tight grip on Jackie's arm the whole way. She didn't say anything, just made an uncomfortable whimpering sound. All the way across the convention floor until we reached a staircase leading away from the noise and bustle. The lounge, as it turned out, was a wide, comfy space that overlooked the Detroit River. On the far wall, someone set up a dozen large television screens so that we could watch a dozen different news shows all at once. ABC, CNBC, Fox, and BBC were all playing at a low volume while Dad's running mate fiddled with the remote control. News reporters, politicians, and supporters mingled together, all chattering excitedly about today's election. Jackie and I finally got away from Mom and secluded ourselves in a corner by the wide window. We huddled up together and waited the evening out as best we could. "What's going to happen if Dad wins?" Jackie asked. "Would we really have to move away?" "Yeah, probably," I admitted. Before we left school that day, I asked the teacher to show me on a globe how far Washington was from Detroit. The answer was scary. As we all gathered in the lounge just upstairs from the Cobo Hall ballroom, my little sister was so frightened that she started to cry in my arms while our parents and their friends gathered around the televisions. "I don't want to move away," Jackie said. "I don't want to start some other school. It'll be worse than now." I put my arm around Jackie's shoulder, and we stayed there for about an hour, wallowing in our own fears and anxieties. Then, sometime around 8 o'clock, there was an eruption of noise from the group of adults. Someone cheered loudly, "Turn up CNN! Turn it up!" "This just in," a news reporter announced through the screen. "CNN can now project that the state of Delaware and its 4 electoral votes have been won by President George White." About 30 grown adults started booing and hissing as an image of the president appeared on the screen. Outside in the convention hall, about 5,000 people were watching the election on a jumbotron, and they made their displeasure known. The noise echoed off the buildings and across the river into Canada. Then the floodgates opened. "Fox News reports that President White has won the states of South Carolina, Maine, Vermont, and Rhode Island," one reporter said. Another one cut in. "MSNBC can now confirm that independent candidate J.D. Robinson has won the states of New York, Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. The professor from Wayne State University is giving our president a real challenge tonight." Cheers and clapping caused Jackie and I to cover our ears. It was so loud the window next to us vibrated. Mom came over and gave the two of us a great big hug. "Isn't this wonderful?" Mom gushed. "Leave us alone," Jackie cried. "Go away," I pouted. The metaphorical hammer was falling. Millions of votes had been cast, and now they were counted. News reporters were tripping over one another to announce the results, while on one screen a map of the United States appeared. Each state was colored in to reflect whichever candidate was declared the winner. Red states went to the president. Blue states were for Senator Dunn. Green states were in my dad's corner. Right away, I noticed something that gave me a lot of hope. "Jackie, look!" I shook my sister's shoulder and pointed towards the map. "Dad's losing." About half of the states were colored in now, and nearly all of them were red. There were 4 states in green, and just one was blue. President White was cleaning house. Jackie and I ran over to the group of watchers and started cheering like football fans. "Go President White!" we cheered. "Go red! Go red!" Then the big one happened. "The Associated Press now reports that Professor Robinson has won the Wolverine State." The hall filled with noise. People were jumping up and down, hugging and crying. Women screamed and men clapped one another on the back. Everyone was happy. The crowd in the hall below erupted into celebration while red, white, and blue fireworks lit up the Detroit River. The Renaissance Tower was illuminated with green lights and a virtual banner that said, "Robinson wins Michigan." Before Jackie and I could say a word, 2 more states joined the green team. Illinois and Texas voted for my dad, but were separated from one another by an ocean of red states. "It's not enough," Jackie and I gasped. "White's gonna win." Meanwhile, Dad's running mate broke out a calculator and started doing some math. After a moment, he muted the televisions and addressed the group. "California," said FBI Director Trevor McDonald. "It all comes down to them. If President White wins in California, the election will end in a tie. However, if California goes green, we'll win by a single vote." I was stunned. Jackie and I went over the map again and again. President White had won 38 out of 50 states. Our dad only got 10 states. Senator Dunn was out of the race. The only state he won was his home turf, West Virginia. The only state left was California. This made no sense to me. From where I was standing, looking at the map, it appeared that President White was winning in a landslide. Jackie and I were both very scared now. All we could do was watch and hope that President White would pull off a miracle. "It's an unusual combination," a Fox News anchor was saying. "A college professor and the FBI director on the same ticket. But J.D. Robinson and Trevor McDonald were colleagues during the Justice Department's campaign against cyber criminals 4 years ago. Their collaboration so far has proven to be quite successful." A political analyst cut across the reporter. "Now, I wouldn't say successful just yet," the expert said. "Let's take a closer look at those numbers. In each of the 10 states Robinson won tonight, it was a close call. He's got the plurality of the votes in states like Michigan, Texas, Virginia, and New York, sure. But in all of those green states, Robinson failed to get more than 50% of the vote. In Texas alone, Robinson's margin of victory was close enough that a recount is already being discussed there. Make no mistake, Robinson is just barely winning right now. That could all change in the next few minutes." Both of the men on the screen vanished and were replaced by a graphic with lots of numbers. National popular vote. Republican, President White, 52,314,580. Democrat, Senator Dunn, 17,190,103. Independent, J.D. Robinson, 27,433,998. Results not complete. States remaining: California, Hawaii, Alaska. These words and numbers were like a shot in the arm for my sister and I. We both jumped up and cheered alongside all of my dad's supporters, albeit for a different reason. In the back of the room, a man dressed in a snappy-looking suit opened a portable safe and withdrew 4 objects: 2 different bottles of champagne and 2 sheets of paper. The first had "Victory" written in blue across the top, while the other had "Concession" spelled in red. At the same moment, one of the journalists in the room closed his laptop computer and shouted, "It's over! Turn on CNN!" A hush fell across the room as all eyes fell on the one TV playing CNN. Jackie and I held on to one another tightly, and I whispered reassuringly, "Dad lost. We're going home. It's going to be okay." Finally, the CNN anchor stopped mid-sentence as a producer got his attention. "This just in," the anchor began. "At 11:01 Eastern Daylight Time, CNN Network is able to say that the state of California and its game-ending 55 electoral votes will go to..." The pause felt like it lasted for 1,000,000 years. I felt like I died several times in that second from anxiety alone. "Robinson and McDonald! The American people have chosen to give their leader the pink slip, and now, on this historic evening..." I don't remember anything he said after that. I was in shock. All I could do was repeatedly ask myself the same question. How could someone win just 11 out of 50 states and still get to be president? The answer is twofold. First, the American Electoral College does allow for a person to become president of the United States while receiving a minimum of popular votes. This sort of thing was rare, but it did happen. The second answer is the more important of the two. Among the many papers, hard drives, data disks, and documents Igarashi provided to me, there was a digitized file containing police reports from the day of the 2004 election. On that day, a grand total of 11 states out of 50 voted for my dad. In the biggest cities of these states, there was a sudden and massive spike in the number of people calling the police to report a suspicious person loitering around voting places. All of these cases were investigated, and none were resolved. The suspicious individual was never found. Both Chris Wright and my grandchild Varian are of the opinion that this suspicious individual hanging around polling places during the election was the Paradox, the Kira Robinson, or possibly an accomplice of hers. Her telepathic powers would have allowed her to sway just enough voters to turn the tide of the election. The evidence is circumstantial at best, but it was enough to shut down all of my arguments against their theory. The result of the election ended up being so close that Akira would have needed to change the minds of only a few hundred voters, perhaps a few dozen per state, a task she was more than capable of accomplishing. Back to the election. If you were a bystander on the Canadian side of the Detroit River at the moment the election ended, you might have thought that Detroit simply blew up. People cheered and clapped and screamed. Car horns blared into the cold night. Office and apartment lights flashed. Cargo ships on the water sounded their foghorns. Men and women were dancing in the streets, while in the suburbs spontaneous block parties broke out. In Cobo Hall, thousands of spectators raised their voices as one. People threw hats and gloves into the air, the chilly climate forgotten in a moment. For me, the moment was painful, both metaphorically and physically. I felt as though the floor was falling out from under me, and the earliest signs of a panic attack were creeping into the peripherals of my vision. At the same time, Jackie screamed loudly and swung at me, scratching my face with her fingernails. "We did it!" Mom grabbed Dad and squealed with joy. "We went all the way!" FBI Director McDonald, who was now the Vice President-elect, popped open a bottle of champagne and cheered. One of the journalists ran over to my dad and stuck a microphone in his face. "Professor Robinson, you've just been elected President of the United States. What are you going to do now?" Jackie and I nearly screamed as our dad drew ourselves, plus Mom, into a great big group hug. "I'm going to tell my family I love them," my dad gushed, "and thank them for their support." I started to vocalize a set of very rude, very angry words, but Dad squeezed me to his side so tightly that all I could manage was a furious little squeak. The reporter looked down at Jackie and I. Then he said, "I'll bet the two of you must be super excited to move to the White House. Did you ever imagine you'd get to spend your childhood in such an incredible place?" "Never." I couldn't keep the contempt out of my voice. Not even once.